Hello and welcome to the second of our series of asynchronous virtual roundtables on transportation, logistics, and supply chain networks under COVID-19. I'm Hani Mohammad, Director of the Northwestern University Transportation Center, and I will serve as moderator of this virtual roundtable. An asynchronous virtual roundtable is one where the interviews have already taken place at different times and are now being presented as part of this roundtable, which will be followed by a live Q&A session. And we ask you, if you would like to ask a question, to use the Q&A feature of your Zoom application. So today we continue where we left off with last week's roundtable. We'll be bringing you multimodal perspectives on supply chain disruptions and industry challenges under COVID-19. Today, we will feature three industry leaders representing three different modal segments of the transportation industry, yet segments that are, in fact, highly interdependent and complementary. We will start with Mr. John Bowe, who serves on the board of American Maritime Group. He is the former president for the Americas of American President Lines, and he has extensive experience in ocean transportation and transportation in general. This will be followed by Mr. Roger Nober, who oversees legal and compliance matters at the Bnsf. He's also in charge of government and community affairs, and again has many years of experience on both the regulatory side as well as on the private industry side. And third, we will hear from Mr. Mike Burton, who is president and CEO of C&K Holdings, a leading drayage company, who will share his experience under COVID-19 with our audience today. With that, begin with our first speaker. You began your freight transportation career in the 70s and spent over 23 years with American President Lines, including 7 years as president for the Americas for APL. You've been responsible for ocean transportation, container terminal, and logistics businesses throughout the Americas in partnership with North American railroads and trucking companies. You've seen many ups and downs in international trade along the way, crises, disruptions. So my first question, how is the current disruption different from those previous experiences? What are you seeing about global trade and the domestic economy from your vantage point? And how much of a reduction in activity are you experiencing relative to the same time last year and or to pre-crisis expectations?
Yeah, Hani, first, yes, I have been, I'm sort of retired now, but consulting, and I do serve on a board, but in one way or another, I've been in this industry since the middle 70s, a long time with APL, as you mentioned. I really can't think of anything, and none of us can, that compares with this disruption, first of all, to our lives and to our personal safety, but thinking of it in transportation terms, I really haven't seen anything like this. And I had the experience of being in the Middle East during the Gulf War and working for an American company. We had to drastically revise our network in order to move freight to support the military, but nothing to compare to this. And then also we've experienced in my career, I've experienced labor disruptions on the West Coast, which have been a severe disruption to the flow of freight. But again, that had it was always known to be a relatively short period of time, and people could put their plans in place to deal with it to a certain extent and be prepared for it to end. I think this is so global in nature, and obviously focused on China to begin with, which is such an important part of the global supply chain for containers. This is really unprecedented. As far as one of the points you mentioned, as far as the reduction in volumes, the numbers that I'm seeing in conversation with other people in the industry is that in the U.S., to take it from our perspective for a moment, In January, the total TEU throughput in all of the ports in the US was off about 4%. In February, off about 13%. And in March, a little bit speculative, not final numbers, off about 18%. I don't think we can, at this point, assume that April will be any better than March. So this is really, just looking at it from the US perspective and volumes through ports in the US, this is really unprecedented. And it presents a lot of challenges that are, I'd say, without a lot of a background for people to work from on how to adjust ocean networks to deal with it. Obviously, there has to be a retrenchment, and there has been trying to position for the current demand and be ready for perhaps the end of this virus and be in position for that, and how to time position for that presents a real challenge. So again, in my experience, which is now pretty long in this business, this is really out of the box. This is really entirely new. I hope I answered your questions there.
Actually, yeah. In fact, of course, our good friend Gene Soroka, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, quoted us about a 20% roughly reduction in the activity at his port in terms of volumes. Yeah. So then you would, I guess, how much more volatility, I guess, and variability are you experiencing or hearing about in terms of the demand side for moving containers, as well as in terms of ship sailings?
Well, I think it's a very interesting picture, Hani, in that what we started out here with disruptions in China that I would say created a supply disruption, and a very severe one, which is still not back to, although China seems to be ahead of things getting its production capacity back online. I understand many of these factories are still only operating at about 50 to 60% capacity. And also that there are severe disruptions in the land transportation, the supporting transportation in China before we even get into the international container system. So that's where it starts with a disruption of supply. But now we have to recognize what's happening again, taking it from the US perspective, what's happening in the US in our economy. We basically, also in an unprecedented way, shut down our economy to a very high degree. And this will now create some demand disruption for the supply chain, for the container supply chain. And it's really difficult to see, how the end of this, how this might be resolved. We should, I think, all of us try to take an optimistic view of this, that we can put things back in place. But I think we're looking at several more months at a minimum of severe disruption to the ocean system. The ocean system, we have to realize, cannot move as dynamically as the air system. It takes a long time to put these large vessels into a place where their rotations create a kind of a normal flow. A lot of that capacity has been withdrawn because of what's happened in China, and it will probably also be withdrawn and idled as we see a more normal return to a more normal demand in the U.S. So this presents challenges. I used to be in the business of planning the network for APL. I worked in Singapore for a few years, and I can tell you, you can't move a network like this on a dime. You have to have some contingencies maybe in place and plan for what ifs. But whatever it is, it's a slow process because the ships just can't be exactly where you want them. The minute that you want them, and they can't be idled on a dime either, as we can see.
So what would you say are the most challenging aspects of the current crisis from the standpoint of the ocean carriers? Is it the drop in demand across many sectors of the economy? Is it the unpredictability of the capacity offered? Is it labor? Is it issues at ports? Is it uncertainty in the time horizon until normal operations, or all of the above?
More or less all of the above, but I'd say the uncertainty about the return to normalization. It's my answer a moment ago. You can't move the network on a dime, and therefore, if you don't know when you can open it up fully again, then you're really presented with some serious challenges. I like to mention one other issue while we keep in mind the human side of the COVID virus. We've heard about passenger ships, and we've even heard recently about military vessels where COVID has broken out. I think something that we haven't heard much about yet, and hopefully we don't, but a worry for the ocean system is are these ocean-going vessels going to be infected, and could that be one further disruption in the supply chain? So that's certainly a worry. But it's the planning aspect of matching. See, in the ocean system, and a lot of work has gone into managing, balancing supply and demand. The evolution and the progression of shipping alliances with companies coming together to jointly plan their services and their capacities. That's been a positive step in terms of rationalizing supply and demand in the business, and it's been a necessary step because when supply and demand gets out of whack in the ocean system, you have this huge amount of capital committed, but without sufficient return. If supply and demand puts things out of balance and pricing goes down, all of a sudden the financial side of the business just becomes turned upside down. And so we have to hope that the alliances will be helpful in planning for the ultimate return, and I think they will. But it's a huge challenge with this very expensive hardware built for a more robust demand cycle and environment. All of a sudden having to be retrenched, but ready to go to turn on again. The planning side of it is definitely the most challenging.
So in terms of the sort of major shippers, what kind of vulnerabilities are you seeing in the supply chains of major shippers? Are these related to sourcing in China, for example? Are these issues at nodes, at ports, intermodal terminal, warehouses, or along the long haul sort of in distribution links?
Well, I think that the vulnerability starts with the dependence on China at this moment for many American companies, and then it kind of flows through the system, because if a system is built for X amount of cargo for Nike, let's say, and all of a sudden it's 80% of X or 70%, then the ports, the warehousing, the trucking, each in line is affected by an unexpected drop in demand. But just there are a couple of large companies with very, very heavy dependence on China. Best Buy, for example, has about 60% of its sourcing in China. Dollar Tree about 50%, and even maybe bigger, better known companies like Nike and I've got a couple here, Kohl's, Gap, all of them 20% or more of their sourcing in China, and obviously if they take a disruption both on the supply side and then maybe ultimately on the demand side, that really sets an underutilization and a misallocation of resources all the way through the supply chain. So obviously everybody has got this challenge to deal with, but we will see it ripple through the system, I think, for quite some time because of the dependence upon China of so many American companies. And if I could just add one thing. Please, speculating here, and maybe not an original thought, but I think this disruption will, and I think it was mentioned by Dr. Chopra in your discussion with him, it will create an even bigger incentive for people to look for alternatives, alternative sourcing perhaps in Asia, alternative sourcing maybe near shore, and alternative sourcing onshore. This will be if there's no other effect of this when we sort of come back to normal, this, I think supply chain folks, inventory, logistics folks in companies are going to be asked, what are you doing to make sure that I'm not dependent on a location like China, but maybe next time it may be some other place. But China is so dominant and has become so disrupted here that people will be incented and directed to find better additional alternatives, if not completely different. So
ocean carriers, of course, have a symbiotic relationship with ports. Would you say there's greater coordination between carriers and ports during this crisis? Certainly the perspective that we got from the Port of LA was that the communication couldn't be better. What is your sense from the carrier side?
Probably another, I mean, this is the trend that has been in place, but these events will accelerate and magnify the need for ocean carriers, importers, and ports to harden up their information systems, to strengthen those information systems. I think if there are winners that come out of this disruption right now, it'll be those that already have the best information systems and visibility of cargo moving through the supply chain. When things get knocked off regular rhythm, information is king, and ability to react is king, and that's dependent upon good information systems. So come back to your original point. Yes, I think all participants, ocean carriers, ports, and all of the people they serve will be incented to improve their information exchange and their information visibility so that disruptions can be managed better than they can in a blind environment.
So you mentioned earlier these alliances, among the various carriers, and of course we know that there's been a wave of consolidation in the ocean carrier industry. Do you think that as the situation continues, we're going to see more consolidation, or is the industry as consolidated as it gets?
Well, there has been a lot of consolidation, honey, even since I left APL, which is about 9 years ago now. APL is now a part of CMA, as an example, one of the biggest carriers. I think, yes, let's face it, there will be people that survive and maybe even eventually thrive as a result of this, and there'll be people that will be very much weakened financially. I read just the other day that PIL, not one of the top 10 carriers in the world, but they're a Singaporean carrier that is within the top 20, that they're looking to reorganize, and I think that they might be a candidate for somebody to acquire. And I think we might still see more consolidation because scale really is important in this business, and there may be room for some more, and there may be some that will be forced by financial events of this disruption.
So looking at the other side of this crisis, are you anticipating then a surge in demand for ocean-going capacity once the situation starts normalizing again, or are you expecting sort of more of a slower ramp up?
It's a good question, and everybody wants to know the answer. I'll start with this, honey. You remember, I mean, it's amazing how things change, how quickly things change. In February, we were given a report on hiring in the U.S. New jobs created 100,000 more than was expected. Something 200,000 plus when about 100,000. That was in February. Here we are today, just in the early part of April. So the U.S. economy was truly booming up to the point of this disruption. There's a certain amount of hope, and I'd say hopefully some realistic expectation that this very deep downdraft that we're going to experience here will be just as steep coming up as it is now going down. The talk of a V-shaped recovery as opposed to a U-shaped recovery. I guess I'm in the camp of those expecting the V-shaped recovery, provided we can put the U.S. economy and the world economy back to work soon enough, and not have done it too much harm in the slowdown that we're now experiencing. So to translate that or to relate that to the transportation business, I hope that the problems of the ocean carriers very soon will be, how do I turn on capacity fast enough? And hopefully there's at least somebody in each one of these companies that's thinking that way, as opposed to, oh my God, how do I shut the system down even more than I have already? So there's some hope and a little bit of analysis maybe in that.
So your industry has deployed quite a bit of technology, particularly information technology and communication technologies over the past few years. And so do you think this investment in digitalization is paying off during this crisis for those who have made it?
Yeah, I think in general the answer is yes. I'm sure there have been some false starts and some things that haven't produced whatever they wanted. But I do think that there have been a lot of smart investments, and I think that as Gene Soroka indicated in your conversation with him, the investment to do it across the supply chain, including ports, including logistics providers in the U.S., including equipment providers, in the intermodal equipment providers, bringing a sort of a comprehensive information exchange, the investment in that. I think what has been done has paid off, and I think that more could also pay good returns.
Good. So, John, this has been very informative. Is there anything else you would like to add that you'd like our audience to take away from this conversation?
Well, I think I'll just go back to my somewhat optimistic approach. I think while we all have to think about this in a personal way first and keep ourselves and our families safe, what I tell my children who are grown children is something good can happen as suddenly as something bad has. We need to keep looking for those bright spots on the horizon, and we need to be ready for it. And so I think in the transportation business, those that are involved and are seeing the world turned upside down should, as they really settle down and work on the crisis, they should keep one eye out on the future and realize that there is a better day here, and they need to be ready for that, just as they're managing today.
John, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Please do stay safe.
And you stay safe too, honey, and thank you to everybody at Northwestern.
So, Roger, you've been with the BNSF since about 2007 or so, and you oversee legal and regulatory matters, environmental claims, compliance, communications, as well as state government and community affairs. Before that, you were a partner in the Washington office of Steptoe and Johnson, and also chaired the U.S. Surface Transportation Board. In your career, you've served in various roles in the Department of Transportation and the U.S. House of Representatives, including serving as chief counsel to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. So you have some amazing, wide-ranging experience here. And through your many years of this experience in rail and transportation in general, you've seen your share of events, disruptions, crises, ups and downs, and so on. How is the current disruption different from these previous experiences? And what are you seeing about economic activity and freight movement from your vantage point? How much of a reduction in activity are you experiencing relative to the same time last year? And what can you tell us about that?
So let's start with the first part of your question. First of all, thank you for that introduction. And, I actually have spent a lot of time thinking about I thought back on some of the previous crises I've been involved in, and whether it was, some of the legislative efforts to really increase transportation funding. I was in DOT, actually as an aviation policy person on September 11th when the planes hit the buildings, and was detailed as one of three people from the administration to work out the airline bailout bill, the airline rescue bill after September 11th, and what it was like then trying to set up the TSA, and then what it was like during the Great Recession when I had left and gone into private practice, some of the service meltdowns that I oversaw when I was at the STB. Was anything like this? And in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. So I talked yesterday had a long chat with the current chairman of the STB, who is a longtime friend, and she was Senator McCain, who was chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee back in 2001. And we were talking about what it was like when airlines were shut down and credit card companies wouldn't process tickets for airlines, and because of the potential liability. And if you were in DC and New York, you felt the fear and the concern of that everybody feels today, right? So I remember going outside 3 days after September 11th and seeing a plane flying. And if you remember, the planes were grounded for 4 days, and thought to myself, why is there a plane in the air? And realized that when I got to DOT, realized that it was because it was an AWACS that was flying around monitoring Washington, and you'd see civilian air patrols. They called them CAPs back then, but that was really just over New York and DC. And I think if you were in the rest of the country, you didn't really feel it. Now, the airlines felt a great deal downturn, but nothing like the broad range that they're seeing now.
Mhm.
And the reason that airlines needed the federal assistance back then was a little bit different. It was liability concerns that they were, even if there was a very small percentage, they'd be held liable. The potential liability from the terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were just unimaginable. And sometimes we have a saying that a very small percentage of a ginormous number is still a really big number. And that was kind of where the airlines were. So from that standpoint, just the broad-based, everybody in the country or the world is feeling concerned, seeing their routines change. That I've never seen, and that's what's unique about this. So in terms of, I think everyone who's involved in freight and freight mobility sees the change in demand and just what's happened. And all of us, people don't shop anymore. If you're in obviously this goes without saying, in the customer facing retail, hospitality, travel, entertainment, in any of those spaces, I mean, you've just stopped. And so from that standpoint at BNSF, we feel very fortunate. I'd say that the attitude of our employees is that, hey, we're a critical part of the supply chain. We need store shelves stocked. We need to move products. We need people to be able to eat and factories to be able to continue. So the response from our employees has been fantastic. Nobody else would, but I'm on some of our Facebook fan pages and see the incredible things that our employees post and the messages that they put out. So our employees have been 120% in doing this. But obviously we are ultimately feeling the economy and the difference of the economy. And so it's a little bit hit and miss what's up and down, and comparing us to last year is not exactly perfect because we had Midwest flooding last year. So some of our commodities that relied heavily on our mid-continent corridor were down last year. So seeing them even this year isn't reflective of a normal demand year.
So the BNSF has historically played a major role in moving agricultural products from the heartland to West Coast ports for export to China, and also bringing intermodal containers from the West Coast to distribution centers all over the country. How are these services affected during this crisis?
Well, everything's affected by the decline in worldwide demand, and in some ways by the changes in consumption patterns. So on our agricultural products, actually those are hanging in there, and there's more domestic production, there's more domestic milling. So our movement mix has shifted a little bit, but there's still, I would say, fairly consistent supply, if not even increases compared to last year. You'll occasionally see just an anomalous number, like what we call pulse crops, so specialty crops like peas, beans, lentils. Those have shot way up because people are buying, canned goods and things that last, like dried peas and beans and things. So folks are using a lot of those. We've noticed that. But I'd say our food products, some of which we classify in our agriculture business unit, some of which we classify if they're refined or produced. So produced soybean oil would be different than soybeans. We have them in different business units, just sort of technicality, but both are kind of hanging in there or up. So the food side, we're seeing things relatively stable and even up in a few places. Now, on the downside, you talked about intermodal. Our intermodal is down, particularly on West Coast imports that are coming in that we classify as international. Now, we classify international things that essentially stay in 40-foot containers and move, and then we classify domestic as things that may be transloaded into 53-foot containers. So even if they're all coming into the Port of LA and leaving out of the LA basin, and I missed Gene's talk from the other day, but I assume he addressed many of these same themes.
We'll be posting that online, actually, so one can go back.
Well, good. Well, I will look forward to watching that.
Yes.
That our international is down but coming back. Much of that is because of the slowdown in production in Asia from when they were shut down over the pandemic, and now you're seeing that ramp back up, although it's still all below last year, at least on us. our domestic and different domestic segments are maybe a little bit above or below last year, but domestic's hanging in, much of which is being driven by restocking. And there's a little bit of question as to how long that will continue to hang in there, because eventually warehouses are going to fill up. I've been advising anyone who asks to go easy on the paper goods, because eventually there's going to be a wave of them. And while the production may shift a little bit from industrial paper towels and paper goods to consumer-based ones, they're not that different. And unless you want a 10-year supply of paper towels or toilet paper, you might be measured and look at pace. So we are focused though on when warehouses will begin to fill up, and then first when the consumer's own ability to store things is going to fill up, and then when the warehouses fill up and what the impact of the supply chain is. But we haven't seen that yet. But you know what, Ani, it's day by day and week by week. Week is a long time in the environment that we're in. It really can change day by day.
So a lot of these products that you mentioned, sort of some of the health sensitive and crisis sensitive sectors, household cleaning products, produce, packaged food products, and the like, we tend to associate these more with trucking, I guess, rather than rail. But of course, I've seen recent communication from the company about rail's role in serving these critical supply chains. And so what kind of impact are you picking up from the vantage point of the services that you are offering your shippers in some of these areas?
I think the supply chain has stayed relatively stable. Some companies, because they have extra drivers, have tried to utilize them and not lay them off by shifting them to driving. So we've seen some of that among some of our large intermodal customers, but by and large, much of the domestic intermodal supply chain is based, at least the business that we handle, is based on both rail and truck together. So much of the truck is focused on a dray network to and from distribution centers, and we carry it the long haul. And that's hanging in there again, but that's in the short run, right? We've been at this just 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
No one's really sure if fuel prices stay so low and unemployment stays so high, whether you'll begin incrementally to see some additional truck capacity come online, just because the cost differential may begin to moderate some.
So Roger, companies like Amazon,
that's speculating. Okay. I don't know. I hope not.
I mean, a lot of this is at this point, exactly.
We're all speculating.
Exactly. So companies like Amazon and Walmart are recruiting relatively large numbers of employees to keep up with the demand surge, I think, on some of their products. Is that impacting the rail industry in general and your operations in particular?
It is not. I mean, our hiring lead time for rail employees is much longer than it is for a warehousing or even for a long haul trucking. So we have, much longer training programs, much longer certification programs and requirements. So you won't see people necessarily come and go. I will say that our employee availability, so how many of our employees are available and sign up and what we call markup to work every day, is at some of their all-time highs. So our folks are readily and out there, and we can all speculate as to why. We think it's because they're patriotic and they want to do their duty, but the alternatives in the marketplace are a lot less. So we are not seeing any employee issues. I think every employee is certainly concerned. I'd say that it has been an adjustment now. Like many transportation companies, work from home is totally new for us, and we were chatting about that just before we got started. And we've had to go to work from home for a couple of reasons. We started going to work from home about 3 weeks ago because if you sort of start from the inside out, which is the main goal is for us to keep running trains, to be able to move commerce and keep the economy moving and resupply people. That's the number one goal of our railroad in any time of stress. And so we had to start with, well, what are the people we absolutely need to be able to do that? And folks who whose jobs can't be then done remotely, we have to create the safest space possible. For us, it's dispatchers, because the people who we dispatch centrally in Fort Worth. Many of the people here at Northwestern have been there and seen that. And so those are tied to mainframe programs and can't easily be done from home connections. So what we did do was we have a remote dispatching center about 10 miles away that was really intended for inclement weather, or if we had somehow our headquarters got put out of commission, we would have a secondary location. So what we've done is we've split the number. We may have 100 dispatchers on duty at any time. We've split them up so that some are at the remote facility and some are still at the headquarters, in order for people to be able to sit farther out and socially distance more. So we did that because the goal was to create the safest space possible for those folks. So absent a few our dispatchers, a couple of operations, a handful, 24 operations leaders, and some HR folks, because this is a people issue more than anything else. All the rest of us are working from home. So that's a new experience for all of us, which we're getting used to. And I will say that there's a lot of pluses to it, but there's certainly a lot of minuses. I do think that as a company, we will be able to work much smarter after this.
So other than these changes,
100% work, we're never going to go to 100% work from home. We're not that. I mean, our organization doesn't lend itself to that.
I think that's going to be true for most of us. So other than the remote work and then the way the dispatchers are being separated, are you doing other things differently in terms of day-to-day operations, specifically because of health concerns for your employees and employees, at your port partners, logistic hubs, and customers?
Well, there's a few things that have come up. Sort of starting with us, we've tried to make sure that we sanitize and provide our employees with hand sanitizer and then the nature of things to be able to have a safe environment when they come in. At a railroad, our workforce is by nature dispersed. So we don't have large industrial facilities like many industrial companies do, with hundreds, if not thousands, of people working in close proximity to one another or within a confined space. So that naturally creates social distancing. We've worked with the FRA to get some innovative regulatory waivers, along with the entire rail industry, passenger rail and the short line industry, to be able to do things like have electronic paperwork and electronic in and out with their iPads, so that people don't even have to go into the division office and mark in and out. They can do that all electronically. And that, again, that's something that may have taken years to get to on its own, but when necessity came, the regulators, and I really want to compliment the FRA, led by Ron Vittori, and how forward-thinking and innovative they've been in letting us all operate for the benefit of our employees and everybody. So something like going to electronic logging in and out is something that might have taken years before, was done in 2 weeks, and provides our employees with a safer location. So that's something that that's a second way that we've made things safer. We still have most of our maintenance of way gangs, while they socially distancing is a little harder there, they're outside, so that's less danger. And then our mechanical shops, where people are working on locomotive and freight cars, are the places where we do have some issues, and we have to take greater care there in terms of sanitizing and checking for people and making sure that they are not, that they're not in any way coming in symptomatic. Then dealing with our customers has been interesting, because many of our customers are facing the same issues that we are, as are the states and localities that we go through. So we've spent a lot of time dealing with shelter-in-place orders and social distancing orders, as well as quarantines, and then when folks come in from different locations, how long they have to stay in quarantine, as well as shutting non-essential businesses like hotels or restaurants, so that when our train crews are out, there's no place they can eat.
Mhm.
So we've had to work with state and local officials, everyone from county commissioners all the way up to the Department of Homeland Security, to try to be able to have some flexibility there. And I will say, to their credit, virtually in all instances, they recognize rail employees as critical employees and make arrangements to make sure that our trains can still operate. And it's incumbent upon us to not let our employees not take advantage of that, right? So that if Texas says folks coming from Louisiana can't come in unless they quarantine for 2 weeks, for argument's sake, that when our train crews are going between, on the Gulf, which they do every single day, they're getting off the train, they're eating, they're going to their hotel, and then they're returning, and they're not just coming across on a Saturday to go to the Walmart. But we've not seen anything like that. So, honey, that's a very long answer. Yes, we spend a lot of time working with our employees and making arrangements to try to make things, to both allow them to still continue to work and keep them as safe as we can.
So along the same lines, how do you work?
That probably was way more answer than you wanted. So yeah, familiar I am with it.
Along the same lines, how do you work with your customers, shippers, and other logistics providers, say trucking companies and ports, in times like this? How important is it to maintain communication channels open with your shipper, carrier, and logistics partners, but also agencies, public agencies, as you mentioned? Is there more crisis-motivated collaboration with competitors?
You know what? There absolutely is more crisis-motivated collaboration starting with our customers, but across the breadth of things. And I think that's because everyone recognizes that we're in a crisis and that we all have to pitch in and set aside things that might have otherwise been large issues. With our customers, particularly, we've worked with our big domestic intermodal shippers to identify what are sort of societally important loads, things carrying paper goods, carrying precursor chemicals for hand sanitizer, things of that nature, right? So while we're not necessarily carrying finished bottles of hand sanitizer, we are carrying the chemicals that go into them in big tank cars. So making sure hospital supplies, scrubs, things like that. So when the actual BCOs who are moving those our customers let us know these are important loads, we'll have our folks in customer support watching them, making sure that they get to where they need to be. And we're pleased to say we've had customers that are volunteering to do be in videos and talk about the cooperation that they've had, which is great. We don't get that very often. My old agency, the Surface Transportation Board, has a rail shipper advisory council, and the chairman mentioned there's a daily call with the FRA and the STB, and then the freight railroads, just to kind of review operational issues. And they mentioned they have never heard such positive feedback from customers. So we're really pleased, although we'd like it to be all the time and not just when we're in a crisis.
Actually, our center's communicator, Joan Pinnell, is a big fan of your account on Twitter and has been retweeting some of these videos that you mentioned. They're very, very effective.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad that she does look at them and read them, and it's always good to know that they're making it. So we try to help our customers wherever we can. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that we don't, at the individual facility level, we sometimes have to work issues out where they'll have their own restrictions on who can come into their facility, and they won't necessarily, that by the terms of them, that would prevent a train crew from coming in unless they could verify every place that they've been. Again, these are things that we've been able to work out wherever we've needed to, because they obviously want their shipments, and we certainly don't want to see that facility be put at risk.
So how do thinking somewhat bigger picture, how do the services provided by the BNSF contribute to making your shippers' supply chains more resilient?
Well, it's a good question. One I'm excited to answer, I might add. Mm-hmm. First of all, the natural scale of rail very much helps our suppliers, and that the ultimate, I mean, this particular crisis and pandemic is one that is so important, is so concerning because it impacts people. And so the scale and the efficiency of rail, that we need fewer people per metric ton of good, means that at a time, if as people get concerned, we are easier to secure and able to provide. Two people can move a whole lot more freight on a railroad than they can by any other mode. So that's something that keeps volumes going. The second way I'd say is that we are, obviously we go places and do things and are in many cases the only realistic supply chain answer for many of the segments. And so us staying moving and staying efficient and keeping our services going is something that will help everyone in the economy. And so we feel like we're playing an important part, but we're playing a part along with everybody else. And we're obviously just one part of the supply chain. So ultimately, our movements are very correlated to what customers and to the economy as a whole is doing. We're only moving things that our customers need moved. So collaborating with them and working together is ultimately at the core of what we do here. But we'll keep things moving. And although if I don't think there's any person really probably on planet Earth that could tell you what things will look like at the end of April as compared to the beginning of April. And we hope that they're better, but we're preparing to keep going forward. And so far our overall volumes are what I would call hanging in there. They're not. We haven't hit the lows that we hit right after the 2008 recession yet. We're actually, the last couple of weeks, we're trending a little better than we might have expected, but certainly just as kind of an overall sort of point of reference, we kind of look at the demarcation of when we're busy versus less busy at about 200,000 units a week. So that's containers or cars. We measure each as a unit. And so when the busiest we ever get is maybe 220,000 units. The low end, so we probably go for the most part between maybe 180,000 and 220,000 units. The last few weeks we've been in the lowest we ever got post 2008 was 150 something thousand units. I don't remember the exact number, I think 156. We've been in the 170s range, although we'll be a little lower. We'll be probably in the maybe tick down a little bit. So we're definitely below the normal range we'd be in, but we are certainly not, when you talk to somebody in the hospitality business where they're down 90% or more, we're nothing like that. So we feel very fortunate and committed to making sure that the economy stays moving and gets going again.
Well, we're very grateful for the good work that you and the BNSF have been doing. And
our family is very much rooting for Northwestern to open again, I might add.
Thank you. So do you have any final thoughts for us? Well,
just that, this is, as we started, Hani, that I've not seen anything like it. And I'm getting to be a gray hair now who's seen a lot of things. And it's sometimes in these unprecedented times, you really learn what's important and what's not, and what are the things that you might take for granted and what's not, and what can we do better. And so I'm in some ways optimistic that in many of our segments, particularly in the freight segment, we'll come out of this and folks will have a better appreciation for just how important things are and how important our segments are. And it's great to be at a consumer-facing, cool tech company, but if you can't move the basics that people need to eat and live, then all the rest of those things matter a little bit less. So that's something that I'm optimistic about for our stakeholders, that folks will appreciate more what it is that we're doing. I really hope that some of the really difficult and battered segments of the transportation world are able to get through this and come back, and because we need them. And the final thing is, I just hope everyone's staying safe and taking care.
Thank you very much, Roger. You as well. So thank you for your time today.
Well, I appreciate that. And thanks for your questions, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Okay, great. So, Mike, you've led for several years now C&K Holdings as the president and CEO. C&K Holdings is the parent company of C&K Trucking, Skyline Express, and AV Logistics. And prior to leading a leveraged buyout of C&K, you were a senior vice president at LaSalle Bank. So you have many years of experience in the transportation industry. You've been a very active member of the transportation industry with the Intermodal Association of North America, the Intermodal Association of Chicago, the Traffic Club of Chicago, and of course our own Business Advisory Council at Northwestern. You have many years of experience in the transportation field and logistics business, and you've seen your share of events, disruptions, crises, ups and downs. How would you say is the current disruption different from these previous experiences? What are you seeing about economic activity and freight movement from your vantage point? And how much of a reduction in activity are you experiencing relative to the same time last year, if at all?
Sure. Be happy to talk about it. So, from our perspective, I mean, obviously this is the biggest disruption to the supply chain since I've been involved in transportation. And that was really back in 2003. I thought the biggest impact before that obviously was 2008 and 2009, and I'd say we're seeing some of the same issues that happened in 2008, 2009 will start to bear its fruit or come to fruition. And so we're trying to use 2008 as kind of an indicator of what do we foresee happening over the next, 3 to 6 months, as this cycle continues. But to answer your question, by far, this is the biggest impact to, the supply chain and the drayage industry that we've seen yet. From both a employee standpoint, we've never been impacted like this, where everyone's had to change their model, work from home, deal with, people that are sick, people that have contacted the coronavirus, which we have several people. We have 1,200 drivers and we have a little over 300 employees. We unfortunately at the size that we do have some people that have been exposed to it. So from that perspective, dealing with that, it's been a big challenge for us. But fortunately, everyone's adapted well. Our drivers are out working in force, so that's been very positive. We'll talk about volumes in a little bit, but overall from that perspective, we're operating well, and we've set up the ability to work from home, which we had these contingency plans, because in various markets we run into issues, whether it be hurricanes or floods or things along those lines that we have to shut down. So from our perspective, this has by far been the worst. And from an employee standpoint, now let's jump into the market and how are we impacted. Certainly, we deal a lot with import and export containers. And obviously we know that the majority of imports come from China. And so after the Chinese New Year, volume usually starts to pick back up, but, they were going through the same issues that we're going through now in China, and productivity pretty much halted. Everyone's relatively familiar with that. And then, so there wasn't a lot of freight shipping out. And then the combination of, the steamship lines with the blank sailings, it slowed volumes down and productivity's come back. So for the last month, our volumes have been, for import side of the business or international side of the business, our volumes have been down significantly, 25%. We are starting to see that pick back up. The vessels are moving now. Freight is moving out of China. We're starting to see it slow down in Europe and a few other markets that are impacted by the imports or exports. And so that's impacting us, on the East Coast. So, we do a lot of import drayage work in Chicago. It's our largest facility. The majority of that comes off the West Coast. So they have been very slow, and so have our competitors, for the last month and a half. especially on the import side. And even, given that we deal with intermodal, domestic intermodal, looking at the domestic side, not the international side, it's been down this year as well. Last couple of weeks, it's down 14% year over year. And then prior to that, if you look at, for the first quarter, it looks like it was down 7 or 8% versus the prior year. So, we've definitely seen, an impact on volumes. And so we haven't lost a lot of drivers, but what we are seeing is, they're getting less work.
So while there's a reduction, as you mentioned, in activity, from on the import side and the intermodal, there must be some increases, I guess, in demand in certain health-sensitive and crisis-sensitive sectors, especially in terms of medical supplies, household cleaning products, produce and packaged food products, and the like. What kind of impact are you picking up from the vantage point of the services that you provide your shippers in these areas, or is that not, or you don't play in that space?
We do a little work for some of the larger domestic people that are being impacted by this, and so we are seeing a pickup in some volume for that. But the majority of what we do is not that time sensitive or grocery type products. So, I know the refrigerated segment's been pretty strong in a number of areas, and we do a little bit of work for them. But that's helped offset some of it. But I'd say, not a lot for us because we just don't play in that marketplace.
So we hear that companies like Amazon and Walmart are recruiting large numbers of employees to keep up with the demand surge on their products. Of course, we don't know how long that's going to continue, but how is that impacting the trucking industry and your business in particular?
Certainly for those that do work for Amazon, there's some additional opportunities there that they're looking for carriers to provide some additional support. And so we do some work for them, so that helps. But from the perspective, we haven't really seen a fallout in our truck driver base to go work for Amazon or to go work for some of the other carriers. So we've our drivers like what they do. They like the business that they're in. They like the markets that they're in, and so we think they're going to stay with us.
So you mentioned that several drivers, unfortunately, had contracted the virus, the disease. Are you doing things differently in terms of day-to-day operations, specifically because of health concerns for your employees, your driver partners, and customers?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from our employees, pretty much we're having very, very limited staff at the terminals, and and then we're spreading them out where we do have to have people at the staff. Second of all, we've implemented some, we did have some paper that we were transferring, and then people would come in or drop off, and we want to avoid that at all costs. So we've gone back to all of our customers that require paperwork, other PODs, bill of ladings, and asked them if we can do it in the form of electronically. Most of them are adhering to that. Some of them take a little bit of a while to adapt to it, but I think everyone understands it. And then we've gone to our drivers, and we didn't have a requirement that they scan all their documents, and some of them were old school and like to bring in the paperwork, and now we're going to those drivers and we're saying, hey, for your safety, for the safety of the terminals, we have to do everything paperless. And then from the perspective of our customers, we've gone back to them and our vendors and gone back to them and said, hey, everything has to be done electronically. And so, the silver lining in this is when we get through this, which we will, and, we'll adapt, that, we'll be able to use, continue with some of these, measures that will help us long term. So we're pretty excited about some of the silver linings related to forcing us and to adapt to the changes.
So going back to the sort of the bigger picture in terms of supply chains and so on, where do you see the most critical vulnerabilities in our existing supply chains, that is in the nation's supply chains, are you concerned about nodes, warehouses shutting down because of contamination concerns or labor getting sick? Or do you see more issues with providing capacity for the loads shippers need to move?
The biggest concern we have is one is the warehouses that we deliver to, not opening, and then, causing a backup of freight. And we're working with customers to find off-site locations and things along those lines to store it. It does get expensive though.
Yeah.
So that's one of the issues, that we're running into. I think the bigger issue that we're starting to see is from a credit standpoint and from a cash flow standpoint is, a number, we do a lot with the retail marketplace, and a number of those, operations have shut down.
They're struggling
or aren't operating.
Yep.
So, you worry about whether they're going to continue and how long they can last. And second of all, they've certainly come back with deferral of payments and different programs to put in place. And then, you just look throughout the supply chain of, who some of your, vendors and customers are, and, are they vulnerable to, can they withstand, the cycle that we're going to go through over the next couple months, and are they going to have a credit issue? And so we probably spent more time this week than we have since 2008, kind of going through our customer base and saying, who are we concerned about?
Yeah.
And then of course all the rumors start, and then that kind of feeds on itself. So, what we're trying to take a stance that, we don't want to make any rash decisions. We think, that this is a short-term issue, hopefully 1 to 2 months, it will be back operating, and that, we're given the, like our customers are giving us the benefit of doubt that we're going to continue to operate and be successful.
So Mike, how do you work with your customers, shippers, other carriers, such as railroads in times like these? How important is it to maintain communication channels open with your shipper, carrier, and logistics partners? Is there more crisis-motivated collaboration, say with competitors, or you're not seeing that?
Not so much. We haven't had a lot of communication with our competitors. We've always operated fairly well in the industry and are willing to share information as far as, what's going on and what we're seeing. So, and our competitors are involved in that. And so we do a lot of collaboration that way, but not directly one-on-one with our competitors. But what we're trying to do with our customers is, in this situation, you need to communicate. So we are reaching out to our customers. If, for example, next week, it was just announced today that, the Port of Norfolk is going to shut down on Wednesday and Friday.
Really? Huh.
Well, that impacts all of our customers, right? Because their volumes are down. And, you're coming into Good Friday on Friday, which they normally operate, but they're going to shut down on Friday. So now we have to go to our customers, where freight's coming in, and say, okay, how do we plan around this? Last week, it was the Port of Baltimore shut down. The week before was the Port of Houston had some issues.
Interesting.
So, we're going to see that sporadically, and we just need to be able to communicate to our customers, be very fluid, let them know what's going on. And there's going to be other things that come up. Whether if volumes do pick back up, we may run into chassis shortages or things along those lines, as things build up and then flow through, you do run into problems. And so our key to our salespeople and our staff, is to communicate, make sure everyone's aware, get on the phone, pick up the phone if you need to call someone if you have an issue. And what we have been impressed with is the amount of information we're getting from both the railroads as well as the steamship lines, the ports. Everyone is open to communication on what's happening. And so we're seeing, more information than we've ever seen before flow through on what's going on.
That's great.
And I think that's positive, and hopefully that will continue.
Great. So how do the services provided by a company such as C&K contribute to making your shippers' supply chains more resilient?
A is, to be able to provide the capacity, and we have the ability to flex up and flex down.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in times like this, you need to have that.
Very good point.
So, that's one of the key things is you got to deliver the freight when the customer needs the freight. And if there is, spikes or different things, or even slowdowns, because that can hurt you as well, is you got to be able to handle it and deal with the ups and downs. So we're doing that. Communication is a key. And then helping them plan, because, they're making decisions. They have a much bigger picture. Our job is to take the freight when it comes into to port or rail facility, deliver it to the customer. When it gets empty, we take the container back, or vice versa on the domestic side, both for the exports and the domestic side. So from that perspective, our job is to provide that information and help them solve potential problems that they're going to have, whether it be a chassis shortage, whether it be a backup at a facility because it's shut down for a day or two and then everyone's backed up, and to deal with those issues so that we can, keep their supply chain moving as fluid as possible.
So, Mike, like you, I believe that we are going to bounce back better than ever. And but the question is, how long do you think the current situation can continue before your company or your customers experience serious economic and financial hardship?
Yeah. So, it's a real good question. I would say, we've modeled out, being an ex-banker, we do a lot of modeling, and we've modeled out the rest of the year, and we've taken various volume reductions. And, in our most recent scenario, we took our volumes down 30%, and we modeled it across the board. And, we looked at both, the balance sheet and the income statement and cash flow and liquidity. And so we're good. You can't factor everything in, but, I think from our perspective, we've remained relatively well capitalized. So we're fortunate from that perspective. Yeah, I'm not, and we're also in a fortunate situation that we have a pretty flexible model using mostly independent contractors. We can flex up and flex down. Independent contractors' ability to work at other places. They can go to work in other markets that may be busier. So we like the model, but we don't have a lot of debt. We're not very capital intensive. So from our perspective, we're pretty fortunate. But we do see, if this continues on, we think like you, hopefully, in most of the, the medical field, that, this is, we get through the curve and we start coming back down, and, hopefully by June, people will be back working, and, we'll start, filling in the supply chain again, and hopefully we get through it. But we do think that the economy is going to take an impact, and, that for the remainder of the year, and, we are going to be in a recession. So from that perspective, how do you operate, and what happens to your supply chain base, during that time? And so we're just making sure that we're being cautious. And then on the other side, most of our competitors and us, are trying to take advantage of the government programs out there, the PPP loan,
that's right,
which can be substantial. When you have we have 1,200 drivers, 300 employees, but you take those 300 employees and then you took their salaries, and, it's a big number that will help in the liquidity. So
excellent.
We see the value of that should help the economy weather through the short-term problem. And then hopefully we can deal with the longer-term thing with, controlling our costs.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Well, Mike, this has been very informative. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
No, we appreciate what you guys are doing to pull all the information together and let us know what's going on. I mean, information is key. The more information we can get, we can react. Everyone's been flexible. We've been super impressed with, just everyone that we deal with. They're addressing this very positive in a very, very difficult time. And and you know, one of the positive things that we're seeing out of this is that, you know, the truck drivers are being appreciated.
Yep,
And,
exactly.
you know, there's been a number of articles, you know, in the media, been very positive, and in the public in general. So that's a very positive thing. The other thing that's positive, that's interesting, that's a side effect is, you know, with the roads, you know, a lot less congested,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot less accidents. And
Exactly.
so, you know, we're seeing, you know, a much improved safety measures coming through, and hopefully we can kind of continue with that. So we just want to say thank you to everyone for all of their support through all of this. You know, everyone's been great, and, you know, very impressed to see how everyone has, you know, our employees and just the industry in general has adapted and, you know, continue to move on and stay positive. So, you know, that's, you know, what we're excited about.
Well, Mike, thank you, and to your team for everything you're doing, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So this
Call from Bnsf audio.
Hello. So at this time, we can go to the Q&A session. I'm pleased today that we have all of the panelists with us, all three, I believe. I know John Bowe is here, and John Bowe is here. Thank you. Mike is with us as well, Mike Burton. I'm not sure if Roger was able to make it today. So please go ahead and ask your questions through the Q&A feature. Our Senior Associate Director, Brett Johnson. Oh, I see Roger has showed up. Excellent. So Brett Johnson will be reading the questions. Brett, if you could turn your video on.
Hello.
Here he is. All right.
Managing everyone else's settings, so we got everybody on board now. I do have a few questions. Actually, I have two questions from Andrew Fox. And let me start with the first one. He had a question for Roger. And he asked, you described the excellent support BNSF is getting from your employees. How would you characterize the response of rail labor organizations?
Well, I would say our employees who are all our operating employees who are all members of labor organizations have gone above and beyond in this, and that they put messages on. They are really proud of what they do. Their families are really proud of what they do. I would say the labor organizations have generally been supportive of the need for railroad workers to be able to continue to operate. Wait, to start my video, I started my video. Of the need for railroad workers to, sorry about that, to continue to operate, the railroad workers to be able to have a safe space to go to work, to be able to comply with some of the orders that we get from around the country, some of which can be consistent with what we do and some of which are not. They were supportive of some of the efforts in the large stimulus bill to be able to address some issues with rail retirement and rail retirement benefits that were to the benefit. So I guess I would characterize them as constructive and helping to move forward, understanding that labor organizations' interests are the well-being of the employees. And while it sounds funny to say that, you know, our interest is the well-being of our employees too, I think that they you know, some of the specific policy issues might be slightly different in how they look at them, but by and large they have been, if the goal is to protect workers, provide them a safe space, and keep freight and commerce moving, we are all on the same team and working forward. That's been our experience. So I would say positive.
Thanks, Roger.
And I think my video's on and I'm unmuted, so that's a step in the right direction.
We have another question from Andrew Fox, and he's directing this to both Roger and John. Maybe we can start with John. But the question is, Mike Burton made a great point about evaluating the credit of their customers. How are Bnsf and how are the ocean carriers approaching this issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. Are you starting with me, Brett?
We could start with you, John, or we can defer to Roger. How do you?
I think that the ocean carriers obviously have got the same sort of problems that Mike mentioned in the motor carrier industry. I think that traditionally in the ocean carrier business, the freight is not released to customers unless charges are paid, and so there is that leverage, you might say, but of course that's not perfect. And I'm sure I'm not associated with an effort in this regard right now. Mike is right in the middle of it. I'm sort of an observer of it. I know that the ocean carriers have a similar process in place and are as concerned as people like Mike are with the credit worthiness of their customers, but I'm not aware of any particular practices that are being done that are different from normal in this regard.
And I would echo that. I would say that as a freight railroad, if you looked at our revenue kind of by volume, if you will, or the largest revenue, they are generally larger business to business relationships. So we probably have few relationships with smaller customers than a trucking company would. Not that we do have some, but fewer, and certainly as a proportion of our overall revenue. Now we have some customers who clearly have asked for revisions in their payment terms, and that's something that we're following and working with. We've had, obviously some customers for whom we are watching their credit worthiness. I think so far things have been stable over the last, call it 4 weeks, but I think that's a question that will become much more acute 8 or 12 weeks from now, or where you start seeing, if we are shut down, and you start seeing the strains going forward of companies with 95% reduced revenue, how that is going to affect their payment abilities. So I think that's something of a function of time as well.
You have more questions, Brett?
I was going to invite the group here. Let's see if we have one more. Yeah, we have a question from Adrian Bailey. It's for Mike Burton. Mike, what do you foresee for the trucking capacity in the future if demand stays depressed with a longer U recovery? Will carrier bankruptcies rise? And what do you predict will happen with driver pay, driver supply?
Am I on? Can you see me now?
We can.
Oh, great. Okay. Good question, Adrian. Thanks for the question. What we see is, if we can only model similar to what we saw in 2008, 2009. If volumes continue to be soft, there will be companies that do go out of business. There will be some capacity that is lost. Some trucking companies or drivers will go to other industries. They only stay where the freight is, where they have enough freight to be successful. And so I think we'll run into those issues and we will see it. What we found in the past is they don't really get into trouble while the volumes are down or reducing down. It's when the volume starts picking back up that they don't have the flexibility to grow with it, and then they run into financial situations. So, what we may not see is, while we're down, they may be able to survive because they're collecting the receivables, they have some cash, but then when things start to pick back up, they could run into some problems. So, that's what we've seen historically. I don't think there'll be a lot of consolidation going on, and I think from a perspective of pricing, at least what we can say what happened in 2009 and 2010 is there was pricing pressures. And, we were, customers asked us to reconsider rates when volumes stayed down for a while. and we had to look at that. And at the same time, then we were able to approach our drivers and ask them to consider some rate reductions as well, which is difficult because the market even back then was relatively tight on capacity for drivers. You know, it loosened up a little bit, but it was still, you know, it's never been a very open market for drivers. So from our perspective, we do think there's going to be some problems if it continues for 6 months, but we're hoping that the whole industry does well, and we do like this time where the public really is appreciating the drivers, and hopefully that will flow through to allow them to survive a little bit better and prosper.
We have another question that I would for a couple of you, but let's direct it toward Roger first. The question is, has your company altered any of your services based on invoking force majeure?
We have not yet. Now, we've had a few instances where individual customers have shut their plants down kind of immediately, and we've had cars coming, and our typical embargo rules would require 48 hours notice, but you can't have a car moving to a facility that's been shut down. So we've had to use some extraordinary measures in those instances. We've not really cut back or eliminated service because of force majeure as of now. Now, some of our customers may have take or pay agreements or minimums where they are going to begin to say that force majeure may be a factor in that, but that hasn't occurred yet, and that would be down the line. We have had that in the past. That is not a new circumstance, and so that's come up during times of floods that we've had, during past recessions, because of regulatory issues involving, you know, power plants and coal. So it's not a new concept, but so far we've not had to alter our service to my knowledge.
So Roger, you're a legal mind here, a legal person. For our
I'm a legal person, I don't know about mine.
For those who are in our audience who neither speak French nor know the legal terminology, can you explain what force majeure is?
Sure. Force majeure is when we have a commercial relationship and contract and expectation, but natural forces, so something that's a force of nature, force majeure, a major force comes into play and makes it impossible for one side or both to be able to fulfill the contract or fulfill their obligation. So if we had for example, a flood and that wiped out our line, and we had a power plant at the end of the flood, we would say we can't serve them with coal because of force majeure, that an act of God has gotten in the way of our ability to serve it.
Thank you. Brett, you have
anyway at C&K?
You know, we have not, or do we plan on initiating any type of force majeure? I mean, it's very limited for the drayage industry to do that anyways. I don't know there's really any contracts where we can. So we don't plan on it. You know, what we are working with is, and the steamship lines and the railroads seem to be working with us. If a customer of ours runs into a demurrage issue because they can't accept the freight, both the railroads and the steamship lines have been relatively flexible to work with them and not charge them.
John, are you aware of any ocean carriers invoking this?
No, I'm aware of any force majeure issues or anyone invoking force majeure, but I think Mike brings up a very good point, which is very much at the top of minds of ocean carriers, ports, and the supply chain using the intermodal system, and that is that there's beginning to develop a backlog in the ports. Containers are not being delivered according to the normal process. Warehouses are beginning to fill up. Some of the goods that are in the pipeline and keep moving, if there's no place for them to go, there will be some storage charges, some demurrage charges that are going to occur. Actually, the charges and whether they're waived or not may be the smaller issue. The bigger issue is just the fluidity of the system, which is challenged by this. And so that is very much a current issue right now for container shipments through ports. And I'm sure that from the motor carrier side, from the warehousing side, this is showing up as well. Not exactly force majeure, but a major disruption to the system.
Honey, at this point, we don't have any more.
I have a question, actually. First, I'm really delighted that all three panelists could be with us live at this time. Now, we of course recorded the interviews last Friday or late last week, and as Roger mentioned, we're looking at things not even in terms of weeks anymore, but in terms of days, in the way that things have been changing. So between the time when we spoke, which was last Friday, and today, have things kind of remained the same? Have things gotten a little better, a little brighter, or have things gotten worse from your perspectives? And Mike, you want to start with that?
Sure. You know, since our meeting, you know, we've some of our processes from what our customers or shippers are requiring has changed. There's a few of our shippers that now when we go to a destination or a warehouse, they're having our driver and taking temperature of our drivers, and if their temperature is up, they're not letting them into the facility. And so that's one of the issues. And then the second is they're more and more are requiring our drivers to wear masks and gloves, and if they're not wearing masks or gloves, they won't be allowed to enter the facility. So that's really, you know, the only material change that I've seen over the last week since we did the interview. But
in terms of outlook, has anything changed?
No, I mean we're all watching and the curve, and you know it's flattening out a little bit, so we're a little more optimistic. But no one's really jumping on the bandwagon that things are going to be great. So we're just continuing on. I don't really see from Monday a material change in what's happening with the economy.
Roger, you want to take that?
I mean, we talked on Thursday or Friday of last week, so a whole week ago, which seems like an eternity. And I think we have found that things have probably worsened some in terms of our volumes. So we are seeing perhaps, and others might be able to comment more on this, but we're seeing perhaps consumer restocking begin to reach sort of the end, that pantries are filling up and then warehouses are filling up. So we think some of the volume from that is challenged. We are seeing more now that Chinese factories have begun to reopen, more coming to the West Coast, but we've also seen the impact of energy prices and $1.70 natural gas continue to go at electricity use and therefore coal volumes, and as well as the sheltering in place is greatly reducing certainly commercial electrical use and to a certain extent industrial as well, and even if home is up a little bit. And so we have seen those things. From an operational standpoint, I mean, the railroad's operating as well as it's ever run. Our velocity was up almost 18% last week. So that was great. And it's not just because of lower volumes either. Then we are seeing, as I think a few folks have mentioned, individual and local requirements for employees, that whether it be masks, for us, one of the biggest challenges has been restrictions on hotel occupancies, because many of our big crew bases would be in a place like rural towns on the Southern Transcon, Winslow, Arizona, Belen, New Mexico, Clovis, New Mexico, where we have large crew base activities, and there just aren't a lot of hotels. So if there's a restriction placed on, say, no hotel can have more than 25% occupancy, that can be a real struggle, and we have to work on those on a one at a time basis. And we have had some states and as Mike indicated, some facilities that our employees have to have their temperature taken or wear protective gear when they come into them to serve, and we have had those as well. We had a few where if somebody was coming from out of state, which many of our folks do, they have to be in quarantine for 14 days before they get into the facility, which of course wouldn't work for delivering and unloading a rail car. So I would say that those are at this point more sporadic than structural and across the board, but they continue to increase.
Thank you, Roger. John, you want to close it off for us?
I would just repeat, Hani, from about a week ago when we first talked, this concern about the congestion in the ports has really raised up on the radar of ports, of ocean carriers, and of the entire supply chain system in the U.S. This is this is a disruption in the flow of equipment as much as it is in the stoppage of cargo moving through the system. So I think this is something that's going to take some management and probably some special provisions by ports in terms of finding storage area for containers and looking for flexible space and warehousing to the extent that can be done. I think that's going to be a challenge that will be with us for a while, because as we shut the U.S. economy down to such a large degree, obviously the ability of the system to digest goods has been decreased as well. In the macro picture, I would say, and I'm glad to see this as one individual anyway, that the concentration or the focus of the country seems to be now as much about how do we work through the system and get our people back to work? How do we do that safely? As much as maybe a week ago we were more focused on hunkering down and sheltering in place. Now there's a lot of talk from the administration on down and through businesses about how do we get people back to work. And I think that's a good thing. We have to keep safety in mind. We have to use whatever we've learned in this crisis so far about keeping people safe, having them tested and having them well prepared with masks or whatever, or with instructions. But I'm happy to see, even in a week's time, more focus on the future and getting people to work.
Thank you very much. So I hope you all agree that this has been an extremely informative and interesting discussion. It's been also particularly interesting to me to get the multimodal perspective as we go from the ocean carrier through the ports, through the rail, and then ultimately the last step, which is the drayage step. So thank you all for contributing to sharing that perspective with us. The first roundtable has already been uploaded, so for viewing for those who are interested. This one will as well sometime early next week, and you can find the links on our website, on the Northwestern University Transportation Center website. With this series is going to continue, and I hope you will join us again next week, Thursday at the same time at 3 p.m. Central. And next week's roundtable will be focusing on ocean shipping in particular, and that will be the focus, and we will have, I'm pleased to announce that we'll have the administrator of the Panama Canal, who will be one of our panelists next week. So thank you all very much, and again, thank you to our panelists and to our audience. Please be safe. Thank you.